Okay, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
All right, so we had talked about maybe just kind of skipping through verse 27, but that's boring. We're going to cover it. It's an adventure story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the voyage to Rome. So we definitely want to look at that. So I've got the tough job of keeping you guys awake while we're on the voyage to Rome, and you get to hear me butcher a bunch of names of locations. Well, we're gonna go to Acts 27, but we're gonna review Acts 26 real quick.
And we're also on survey 27.
No.
We are on number 25. Thank you. Acts survey. I think this is 25. We're gonna finish this series in 26. So that's the plan.
2026?
Huh?
2026?
Well, no. Next time I teach, we're going to finish this thing.
It's humor all day.
I don't know if I'm happy about that or not.
Well, we'll go on to something else.
Okay, good. Because I enjoy your teaching.
See, this is the kind of lesson today, which would be good if I had a screen, which could have a big old map
That's
on it, and I
something you
could
need to work on.
point, to where we were going. But as it is, you're just going to have a map, and you're just going to have to follow along with your little pinky as we move through the ancient world. So who needs a map? Paul's voyage to Rome is the one we're on.
Mine's a new one.
Paul's voyage to Rome. You got it. It's not a great map, but it's good.
Get it?
Y'all do it? Need one?
I think so.
I think this was the pastor's book, isn't it?
You know, I can't see.
Oh,
The letters are small. I'm not gonna be
yeah,
able to-
they're small.
Did anybody catch my little conversation with Brother Rod a few weeks ago?
I did.
Yeah.
Wait, you got a
He's
comment?
hardly ever
No,
seen.
he's a great teacher. He's a great teacher. But he does read the mystery into Acts 9. And Shirley, forgive me. I'm going to be talking crazy
I'm just
stuff to you,
listening.
so just kind of roll with it. But he wants to read the mystery into Acts 9, and because he does that, each place where we went into baptism, Paul's baptized, he baptizes people, he baptizes Lydia and her household, he baptizes, who else? He baptizes the Philippian jailer and his household. When I say baptizes, I'm talking about water baptism,
Right.
guys. And he also baptizes those 12 disciples of John the Baptist in Acts 19, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because our brother, and he is our brother, and I'm not raking him over the coals, but because that he sees the mystery of Ephesians and he reads it into the book of Acts, he can't see water there. He has to say that is dry baptism in each place.
Well,
and I cannot go with that. It's water baptism, folks.
Yeah.
If the program had changed that drastically, Luke would have had to have done some splaining there every time he says water baptism. And I'll tell you something else. Remember that controversy in Acts 15 where it was over circumcision and keeping of the law? It would have been over water baptism, because that would have been a lot bigger issue.
Yeah.
Because everybody is water baptized in the book of Acts. There's no getting around it. Meanwhile, extra credit, think about this, and we'll talk about it next time. We know that there's a water baptism in the book of Acts, as I said, and the baptism of the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts involves the manifestation of the Spirit
Right.
in the book of Acts. We know that. But is there also a dry baptism of the Spirit in the book of Acts? Think about that. And somebody for extra credit will tell me a verse next time.
Well, I already
not this
know,
time.
but I'm not gonna say anything.
Yeah. So there is some interplay between the two things, possibly. And that's what we'll talk about. Well, that'll be one of the things we look at when we wrap up the book, maybe, is to just we gave an overview at the beginning, we'll give an overview at the end, and hopefully remind everybody the reason we're studying the book of Acts. So let's review chapter 26 real quick. Paul is in custody. He is in Caesarea. He is before the Roman proconsul, the governor, who is Festus, and he's also before the king, Herod Agrippa II, and his sister Bernice. And Paul recounts his conversion experience. And we learn from this that his ministry to the Gentiles is from the beginning. The Lord announces that to him from the beginning. And start maybe verse 15, where the Lord appears to him on Damascus Road and says that it's hard for you to kick against the system, as it were. And I said, Paul says, who art thou, Lord? And he said, I'm Jesus whom thou persecutest. But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose. We're in Acts 26:16. To make thee a minister or a servant and a witness, both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee. And so remember, this is progressive revelation.
Right.
Paul's got information just at the appearance of Jesus Christ and the things that he tells him. But there's going to be more information that's coming, is what he's saying. So both in those things in which you've seen and in those things in which I will appear unto thee, progressive revelation. Okay? Delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send thee. So his ministry, and we get from the other accounts that it's to the house of Israel, it's to kings, princes, and the Gentiles. Well, here first Paul is going to mention the Gentiles. The Lord mentioning the Gentiles to him. And so we know that Paul understands from the get-go of his calling that he's going to have a special role in bringing the gospel of God and the gospel of Christ to the Gentiles.
Right.
And the Lord says, I'm going to send thee now to the Gentiles. Verse 18, to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. Okay, so Paul gets that his ministry is going to be to the Gentiles, and we understand from other places that all through the book of Acts, the gospel of God goes to the Jew first, and also to the Greek, or also to the Gentile. First the Jew, because it was proper for it to go to the people of God first, and then to the Gentile. And the Gentiles were being brought in, being grafted into the hope of Israel to make the Hebrews jealous. Okay, we get that from Romans 11. Whereupon, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient unto the heavenly vision, verse 20, but showed first unto them of Damascus and Jerusalem and throughout all the coast of Judea, the Jew first. You see that? Damascus, Jerusalem, throughout Judea, and then to the Gentiles, the Jew first, and also to the Greek, or the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God and do works meet for repentance. For this cause the Jews sought to kill me, and caught me in the temple and went about to kill me. Verse 22. Having therefore obtained help of God, I continue unto this day, witnessing both to small and great, saying none other things than those which the prophets and Moses did say should come. So, none other things, Paul says. And what were those none other things that Moses and the prophets did say should come? That Christ should suffer, and that he should be raised first, and that he should be the first that should rise from the dead, and should show light unto the people and to the Gentiles. Okay? So this is the hope of Israel, and he's offering it to his people first. And the hope of Israel is the gospel of God. It's Jesus Christ crucified for sins and raised and declared the Son of God with power, Romans 1. Okay? And so that is his goal, that is his mission, and he says, none other things have I spoken. And look, folks, we're in, as a believer, Paul is on the north side of his 20s Okay, so he was a believer early 30s, 32, 33, somewhere around that. We're heading up into the 80s, 60s at this point. So it's been the north side of the 20s, almost 30 years. And at this point, he can say that I'm in chains, I'm bound for the hope of Israel. And he can say that he preaches none other things than what Moses and the prophets did say should come. Okay, so the point being is, what Paul is preaching and teaching, and as he's declaring the gospel of God, proclaiming and heralding it, he's doing it from the Old Testament scriptures, none other things. Okay, and when we get into the prison epistles, the post-Acts period, well, we're going to see some things are different, so to the point where Paul can say that I am the prisoner in bonds for who?
Gentiles.
You Gentiles.
Right.
Okay, so some things are going to change, and that is what we're going to see at the end of this book when we get there. Okay, so again, that is a life-changing verse. If you'll grasp hold of verse 22 and realize that even though Paul is the minister both to the people and to the Gentiles, it's for the hope of Israel that he's in bonds at this time. Folks, we're going to come to the point where Israel is dismissed at the end of this book. They're going to be set aside, and the gospel is not going to be to the Jew first,
right,
and also to the Greek. It's going to be to all nations, all peoples equally. Israel is not going to be the head and the Gentiles the tail. Everybody's on an equal playing field, and until this point, Israel is in focus. Will they accept their Messiah? Will they accept King Jesus? Or will they reject him? At the end of the book, we're going to see that they will reject him, and that after which Paul will receive the revelation of the mystery. That's what Ephesians is about. That's what Colossians is about. Okay? So Paul meets with these three, and they all agree that there's nothing that he's done that would be worthy of death, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be freed. However, he's appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar he will go. And that's what this whole meeting was about, was to see if there are any real charges that we can send it on up the food chain. We need to send some charges. Doesn't look like they ever really got any, but nonetheless, he is going to Rome to appeal to Caesar. Okay, so that's our review of chapter 26. And now we get to our exciting travel adventure on the high seas. So chapter 27, verse 1. And it was determined that we should sail into Italy. They delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band. Okay, so Paul, to get to Rome, got to get to Italy, and his guard, over 100 soldiers, is named Julius. And entering into a ship at Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coasts of Asia. One Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. Okay, and this Aristarchus, we're going to see him in a couple of other places. He's back in Acts 20. He's in the Colossians letter as a fellow prisoner. He's in Philemon in verse 24 as a fellow laborer, which is interesting. So don't know if he was entered this as a free person going with Paul and his company to assist him, and he gets brought in as a prisoner somehow as well, or if Paul is just saying, well, he's my fellow, I'm a prisoner, so he's along with me, and he calls him his fellow prisoner and his fellow laborer. At any rate, that's one of the brothers. And notice here, we've got we, us, all through here. So the author is who? Luke. And Luke is with the party here, because we get lots of we sections here. So Luke is on this journey, so we have a first-hand account of the trip to Rome. Okay, and the next day, so on your map, we've headed from Caesarea, and we're going up the coast. So Caesarea is just above Jerusalem in the bottom right side. And leaving Caesarea, we're going to end up at Sidon. The next day, verse 3, we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. So just as Paul was at some liberty when he was in bonds in Caesarea, well, these Romans are going to treat him well, and that seems to be the case throughout this first imprisonment. Even in Philippians, Paul is anticipating being set free. And that, we know that's a prison letter, and it's pretty apparent that things were going well for him, even though he was bound to a guard, as it were. So they've gone up to Sidon. All right, so we're going up the coast, and you follow your little orange line around, and we'd launched from thence. We sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. Now what we're going to find out is they're traveling in a treacherous season. Okay, this is in the fall, very, very late summer, probably end of September, and heading in towards the winter. They're going to have rough weather the whole way. And so they're going to try to stick to the coast of Asia Minor there. If you see how they stick, we're underneath Cappadocia and Galatia on the water. They're just kind of running along that line there. And they sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. So they've got the winds going against them. And when it says under Cyprus, I believe your map is correct, that they're in between the two bodies of land. And when it says under Cyprus, it means that under the protection of Cyprus and the other Asia Minor, they're going in between the two. When they'd sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, and that's how we know that it's going in between Cyprus and Asia rather than underneath Cyprus. They came to Myra, a city of Lycia. Okay, so you got Myra there, and then we're going to get on another ship. Okay, so what we've got is we've got soldiers, we've got a military group that's getting on cargo ships, essentially. And the centurion, verse 6, found a ship of Alexandria, so it's an Egyptian ship, and sailing into Italy, and he put us there on. Okay, so the normal course, if you look at your map, we're in Myra. The normal course would be to sail across the Aegean Sea. You see where Achaia is, across from the Aegean Sea. Just below Achaia, there's a very tiny little space there, and that's the Isthmus of Corinth. And in ancient times, there was a road there. And they actually, this is interesting, they actually had a little railroad of some sort. It's about 5 miles between the Aegean Sea into the Adriatic, and you've got this little landmass, an isthmus, and so they would stop at Cenchreae on one side, and they would travel over, and Corinth would be on the other side. And they actually took ships and boats, and they would get them over that landmass. They had some sort of a construction. I think it was pulleys or wood, I'm not sure, but they had a construction where they could move small ships and cargo over this landmass, and that would keep them from having to go all the way underneath Greece to get to Italy. Okay, so they would go through that small landmass right where it says Achaia, right underneath that, and they'd be on that body of water, and then they could go straight across to Rhegium. See that where Sicily is? And it doesn't show it, but the little toe of the boot of Italy, there's water there. It doesn't show that, but you could go through the water, the little canal there separating the toe from Sicily, and then go up into Italy. And so that way they could avoid going underneath Greece by water, because the weather was treacherous back then in certain seasons. And that's what we've got going on here. So they've got a new ship to Alexandria, and they're sailing to Italy, and I take it they're probably with the intention of going through that isthmus of Achaia and making a straight shot of it. But when they, verse 7, had sailed slowly many days, scarce were come over Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmon. And so instead of going straight across, they ended up with strong headwinds going against them, and they ended up going south, and they're going underneath Crete, which is about dead center on your map. And hardly passing, it came to a place called the Fair Havens. And you see Fair Havens on your map. That's north of the island of Crete, whereunto was the city of Lycia. Now much time was spent when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, and Paul admonished them. So this fast is probably referring to the Jewish Day of Atonement, and that's how we can say it's probably mid to late September here, and we're heading into the bad weather months. And Paul said to them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ships, but also of our lives. Okay, so Paul is giving a prophecy here. We're still in the Acts period, folks. Prophecy, and we're going to see that Paul is visited by an angel as well. This is the Acts period, and Paul is an apostle, and he is going to get direct communication from God concerning this trip. And at first, the centurion Julius, well, he doesn't really pay Paul too much mind. He's been respectful towards him, but he doesn't know anything about the God of this guy. He's just another Yahoo probably. And so they're not going to listen to Paul. Paul is advising them to stay right where they are in the Fair Havens, because the weather's going to get pretty rough, he's saying. They're going to lose some people or lose the ship. So they didn't listen to Paul. And in verse 12, because the haven was not commodious to winter in, I take it that there wasn't a lot of supplies for them to winter there. They would be there several months, so they were afraid the supplies would run low in that place. They were advised to depart thence also, if any means they might attain to Phoenix or Phenice, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the south and northwest. That's not on your map, but they're saying let's go over to the other side, the far end of Crete, because there's better, it's more commodious. There's going to be more provision for us, and we're going to find out that this is a medium-sized group of people. There's 276 people on this, and that sounds like a lot, but it's said that there were some ships that held 600. So a pretty good size crew, but not a huge amount. Again, this is a cargo ship, not a military ship, and they've just caught a ride on it. Okay, so let's see. And there to winter in Phoenix, which is in a haven of Crete, and lie toward the south. Verse 13. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had attained their purpose, loosing thence they sailed close by Crete. So they got a south wind in their favor. They think it's going to be a good trip, no problem. But not long after, verse 14, arose a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. This would be a northeaster. So they've got hard winds and a storm blowing from the northeast onto them, and that's going to drive them down south rather than westerly where they want to go. And running into a certain island called Clauda, which is not on your map, we had much work to come by the boat, and so they put down their raft or whatever, and they do some repair work on the boat, which I really don't understand a whole lot about, not being an ancient mariner. They do some work on the ship. Okay, and so they're still being driven after they get that work done. And verse 18, they were exceedingly tossed with the tempest, and the next day they lightened the ship. So they started throwing overboard cargo, whatever they can, to lighten the ship because of this weather. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. And that's not just cargo. They're throwing out whatever they can to lighten the load. When neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you've hearkened to me, and have not loosed from Crete to have gained this harm and loss. So you've not listened to me. But now I exhort you. So Paul says, I told you so. You should have listened to me. I told you so. But now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. Nobody's going to die on this ship, but we're going to lose the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told of me. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Well, they're going to believe Paul now. They're going to start listening to him. This I told you so doesn't anger him as much as we're listening to you now. But when the 14th night was come, we were driven up and down the Adria. About midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. Okay, so they could tell they're drawing near to some land. And they sounded and found out 20 fathoms. And when they gone a little further, they sounded again, found 15 fathoms. Maybe somebody knows about this, but they've got some sort of a line. And that they're measuring, that's got a weight on it, and they're measuring how far down. And by doing that, they can tell that, well, the elevation is rising. We're getting away from the water. We're coming to land. And this is important because they don't want to wreck the ship. As well, it tells them what sort of area they're heading into. So they're coming out of the deep waters is what they're finding out. And fearing lest we should fall upon the rocks, they cast anchors under the stern and wished for the day. And the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship. Okay, we're coming on land. Let's get out of this ship. So they're going to put that boat down again to flee. And the centurion gets word of it. And Paul says, well, you don't do it. We will die if we lose the help of the shipmen. Remember, these guys aren't the shipmen. These are the military guys. We need these guys or we're not all going to survive. And so they cut that boat loose. Okay. And I skipped a couple of verses there. Mm-hmm. Paul advises them to eat, take some meat. And when he thus spoken, they took bread and they gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he broke it, he began to eat. I tell you what, I'm thinking there were some believers on this ship by the end of the voyage. What do y'all think? Then they were all of good cheer, and they took meat or food. And when we were all in the ship, 203 score and 16 souls, that's 276 people on board this ship. When they eaten, they lightened the ship, and they cast out the wheat into the sea. And I wonder about that. They cast out the food, like they know we're going to lose the ship.
Right.
It's over. Whatever hope we have, it's going to be on this island that Paul has told us about.
Right.
And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek. So they didn't see the land, but they saw a creek and a shore, and which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust into the ship. So they wanted to go in, maybe perhaps go into a harbor to get closer to the land. When they taken up the anchors to go into this, what they perceived to be a harbor, they committed themselves into the sea and loosed the rudder bands, hoisted the mainsail to the wind, and made toward the shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground. So the front of the ship goes into the ground. It's stuck, and they're caught between the seas, and it's the hinder part of the boat is being broken apart by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them all for their purpose. So he knows the specialness of Paul, and he's not going to let his soldiers kill any of them. Now, these soldiers knew that if prisoners escaped, that they would be held accountable for them, and that's why they wanted to just go ahead and kill them now, because their heads might be on the chopping block if somebody got away, was the idea there. But the centurion Julius is like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to trust what Paul has told us at this point. And it came to pass, he commanded, middle of verse 33, that they that which could swim should cast themselves into the sea first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they all escaped, all safe to land. So just as Paul said, and the angel had told Paul, every one of them survived, be it by swimming or floating to the land. Okay, and that's our adventure story. All right, so now we're on the island, and we're going to pay close attention to the Apostle Paul. We're going to think about the Acts period. We're going to think about what we're seeing here in Paul, and we're going to see more continuity with the Acts timeline and not with the dispensation of the mystery.
Right.
And when they were escaped, verse 1, then they knew that the island was called Melita, and this is the present island of Malta, actually. Okay, so it's Melita or Malta. And the barbarous people, so we've got some pagans here. This is the third or fourth encounter of Paul with pagans. I think the third that's mentioned in Acts. And they showed us no little kindness. They kindled a fire and received us everyone because of the present rain and because of the cold. So winter's coming on. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hand. And when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. So superstition, all right, this is karma. He must be a bad guy because he got bit on the hand. He's going to die. Okay, so this is pagan thinking. And Paul shook, verse 5, shook the beast. He shook off the snake into the fire, and he felt no harm. And so they're watching him. They're just watching him for him to, grab his throat, start turning purple, and hit the ground. But that doesn't happen. Howbeit they looked, and then he should have swollen and fallen down dead suddenly. But after they looked a great while, they saw no harm come to him. They changed their minds, and they said he was a god. So once again, there's our pagans.
Right.
They get it wrong both ways.
Right.
They get it wrong both ways. And so I'm sure Paul protested that, just like he did back in, what city was that? Was it Lystra? With those that said he was Mercury. But nonetheless, on we go. But the point here is that this is one of the signs of Mark 16, that they could handle venomous beasts, that they were bitten,
Right.
it wouldn't harm them. It's a sign of an apostle. It's a sign of a believer in the Acts period. Okay? There's some snake handlers in the Appalachians. Every now and then one of them dies and gets
Right.
bit. Wouldn't advise you to do that.
Right.
No.
Wouldn't, and it says you can drink poison and not be harmed. Well, we could mix up some cocktails here, but it would be a Jonestown Massacre sort of thing. We wouldn't make it.
Right.
Why? Because we don't live in the Acts period, guys.
Right.
And so once again, we see we're still firmly in Acts, and we're seeing the signs of the Acts period. And this time it's to Gentiles, and that's kind of unusual. And we're going to see some gifts of healing, and that's going to be
Right.
towards the Gentiles as well. And that's interesting also. Okay, so he was a god. No, he wasn't. But verse 7. In the same quarters were possessions of the chief men of the island, chief man of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and lodged us 3 days courteously. Now, with a name like Publius, he sounds like a Roman official to me. Don't know, but I suspect that Rome has her hand on the island of Melita at this time as well. And it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and of a bloody flux. Sounds like dysentery or something. To whom Paul entered in and prayed and laid his hands on him and healed him. So we've got the gift of healing going on strong here. It's a sign gift. The sign gifts still in Acts period, still going strong here at the end of Acts 28. So what are we're not seeing the transition. Remember the transition? Some people say, well, Paul got the mystery in Acts 9, and so that program is fading out, and the mystery program is expanding. Well, the signs are still very much in place at this time. So it's not so much a transition. It's really not really. And so, when this was done, when Publius' father was healed, others also which had diseases in the island came and were healed. So Paul apparently is healing these folks that said he was a god. Well, I'm sure he's explaining, I'm not a god. He's saying the true God has given me this sign that I can do these things through him. Okay, so he's even here, he's showing his authority and he's validating his message. We don't need that validation today. We have the Word of God complete. That's all we need. Okay, and after 3 months, we departed in the ship of Alexandria, a ship of Alexandria, which had wintered in the isle, whose sign was Castor and Pollux, more paganism. But at any rate, they're going to hitch another ride. They've wintered in Melita, and now they're ready to go on the last leg of the journey. And they landed, you get your map again, at Syracuse, and there they tarried 3 days, and you can see that Syracuse is on the left side. You see Malta or Melita, and then up above that, Syracuse. So we're in Sicily, all right? We're in Italy now, Italy proper, I would say. And from thence, and they tarried in Syracuse 3 days, and from thence we fetched a compass. That just means they circled around. The compass is round, so they circled. And it looks like it's not a full circle, but I would say just going through that little bridge between Rhegium into the left side of the boot would probably be fetching a compass, because it's going to get them the other side of the land. That's probably what they mean there. At any rate, they came to Rhegium, and after 1 day, the south wind blew. That's the winds they need. They need that south wind to get them up into Italy proper. And we came the next day to Puteoli. So they came quite a way in a day, didn't they? See Rhegium, and the water doesn't show there at Rhegium, but there is a water passage there to get them onto the other side of Italy. And they went all the way up the coast in a day. And think about that, how difficult and treacherous that journey was. But they went maybe a good quarter of the way in 1 day with the south winds at them, aiding them. At any rate, when they got to Italy, when I got to the boot of Italy, at Puteoli, any Italians in the room can pronounce that right? Well, they found brethren, and they desired to tarry with them 7 days. And so we went toward Rome. Okay, so they're getting really close to Rome now. And the 3 taverns, from thence the brethren heard of us, and they came to meet us as far as Appii Forum. So, Paul has never been to Rome, but everybody knows who he is. He's written this letter to them, and it's widespread who he is within the body of Christ in Rome, and they're coming to greet their brother. And that's interesting, because when he gets to the leaders of the Jews, they say, we haven't heard anything about this thing except it's a sect evil spoken of, which is interesting. And you'll remember how that they really prosecuted him back in Caesarea and Jerusalem. It's like it didn't get that far. I guess the weather hindered them. I don't know. But at any rate, Paul is going to be comforted by his brethren who he's meeting for the first time. These are people that have come to the knowledge of Christ, probably much of them through people that have been under Paul, Aquila and Priscilla and others, and maybe some from Acts 2 even. I don't know. Remember, the whole world had gathered at Acts 2. And so the world of the Hebrews had gathered, and so they would have taken it back out into Rome as well. At any rate, Paul took courage in that and comfort from meeting his brethren in Rome. And so they stayed in the 3 taverns. And verse 16, when they came to Rome, the centurion delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard, but Paul was suffered to dwell by himself with a soldier that kept him. So we've got Paul still with a measure of freedom. It seems he's chained or tied to a soldier, but he's not being held in a dungeon, not being denied bread and water.
Right.
He's got a circle of friends around him that are able to minister and to help him.
Uh-huh.
And so here he is. He's in Rome, finally, after all this time. Didn't get there the way he had anticipated, but
Right.
the Lord brought him to Rome. And the Lord has his reasons to bring him to Rome. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. So 3 days, Paul calls the chief of the Jews together. And when they're come together, he said to them, and he's going to give them the gospel of God.
Uh-huh.
And they're going to reject it again. Paul's going to give his pronouncement. And we're going to look at that in some detail next time and think about that. We're going to think about the kingdom of God a little while next time. If you got some notes, I want y'all to read Isaiah 6. We're going to look at Isaiah 6 next time. The call of Isaiah. And Paul's going to quote a couple of verses in Isaiah 6. And we're going to look at that. And we're going to consider that prophecy of Isaiah and its place and how Paul uses it. That will be important. And I also, just for fun, want to look and see how the Lord uses that. In John chapter 12, he'll use that same quotation from Isaiah. And it's also in Matthew, by the way. And that's interesting. And that will be helpful to us. Okay? So do we see the continuity in this Acts period? It's still the same thing going on. We need not read the mystery doctrine and take it and transpose it during this time. This was a special time when they were doing the work of presenting the gospel of God to Israel first. It was appropriate, it was important, because they still had the hope of the kingdom as long as the Lord had not set them aside. Okay? The fact that they would be set aside in the way that they were set aside, well, that's part of the mystery. Okay? And we'll look at that a little bit next time. All right, I hope it didn't bore you too much. No. I was telling him I wish I had a big map and I could just kind of point to where we were going, but it is what it is.
And it ain't what it ain't.
Yeah. Any questions? I could use that fan now. How's my hair, Leticia?
Good. I lied to you, but